Hello students, welcome again. Continuing with the second class of strategic management, we are going to continue speaking about the strategic purpose of companies. How is that strategic purpose formed? Who have influence of the formation of such strategic purpose? And in this video, we are going to speak about the governance structure of companies. Okay, we are going to speak about the corporate governance. What is corporate governance? Well, mainly corporate governance is the system by which companies are directed and controlled. Okay, here you can read two typical definitions of corporate governance. First of all, corporate governance is concerned with the structures and system of control by which managers are held accountable to those who have a legitimate stake in an organization. And finally, corporate governance is the standard of rules that allows organizations to ensure that they are serving the needs of their shareholders, stakeholders, management team, and customers effectively and responsibly. Corporate governance is a movement who has no more than 20 years ago, and it started due to several reasons. Okay. First of all, the separation of ownership and management, control of organizations. Okay, let's think that in small businesses, management and ownership used to be together, but in big businesses, even medium companies, those levels, ownership and management, shall be separated. Okay, that this is the ideal norm. Another factor who increased the corporate governance is several corporate scandals since 1990s. Okay, those scandals increased the public debate about how different parties in governance chain within a company shall interact among them. Let's think, for example, in the case of Enron and Arthur Andersen, and the relationship among the shareholders or the board of directors. Okay, those scandals increase the feeling that shareholders shall to control board of directors. The board of directors shall control the management level, or the auditors shall to control the accountability of the companies. Okay. And finally, there's been an increased accountability to wider stakeholders' interest. Okay, let's think that big investors now want to control the board of directors. They think that they have to have a big accountability, a big control over the board of directors, and of course, all those factors help to increase the importance of corporate governance in companies. To understand better corporate governance, we are going to speak on the next slides about the two main levels of companies. Okay, the management level, who is in the board of directors, and the ownership level, who is, of course, on the shareholders. Okay, we are going to speak about how those levels interact between them. Usually, those two levels have been always together, but with the incorporation of corporate governance, there's been a kind of divorce of those two levels. Nowadays, nobody thinks that ownership shall to be joined with the board of directors in big companies or even in medium companies. There is a total separation of ownership and management control of organization. And corporate governance is about such divorce between ownership and board of directors. Regardless the definition that we have seen of corporate governance, I'm going to try to explain with my own words. Okay, with that purpose, we are going to use the ownership chart we saw on the first video. Here you can see a normal company with 3 shareholders, and we have to speak differently from the management body, or the governing body, and the ownership, the shareholders. Okay, of course, management body or governing body could be a sole director, 2 or more joint and severally directors, or the most usual way in big companies or even in medium companies, which is board of directors. Okay, who appoint those board of directors? Who appoint the directors, or a sole director of a company? Who appoint the management level? Of course, shareholders do. Within the shareholders general meeting, shareholders has the duty to appoint directors of companies. In normal companies, we are now speaking about normal companies, private companies, okay, without thinking in stock markets or in listed companies. In private companies, of course, owners of such companies, the shareholders, appoint the directors, and therefore the majority shareholder control the direction of the company, control the big objectives of the company, not the daily management, but yes, the main purpose, the main objectives of the company. Let's think, for example, in the case of that the board of directors do not follow express instruction given by the shareholders, expressed in the shareholders general meeting. On the next day, the shareholder or the majority shareholder or the general shareholders meeting is going to dismiss such director or such board of directors. So the board of directors usually is going to obey the instructions of the general shareholders meeting. But here we are going to see what happened in listed companies. Okay, by comparing the ownership chart between a private company and the ownership chart of a listed company. Well, in listed companies, the system is just the opposite. In listed companies, the board of directors used to control the company. Because usually, as we saw when we spoke about the Mendelow's matrix, there are a lot of minority shareholders who have no interest in the management or in the day-to-day of the company, and therefore board of directors have the control of the company. They have the control of they used to have the control of the general shareholders meeting. In practice, a lot of times the board of directors had no control at all. It was not controlled by the general shareholders meeting, and this is why appeared the corporate governance movement, in order to invert the system and allow shareholders to really control board of directors. And this is why corporate governance provides a lot of tools of the general shareholders meeting, of the shareholders in general, to control, to have an accountability of the board of directors. And this is why corporate governance is so important, because corporate governance tries to control the board of directors of companies. We are going to speak about the corporate governance objectives related with directors. Okay, to put it in context, there was a time in which companies used to appoint directors. The general shareholders meeting used to appoint directors just for their names or their reputation, and they really didn't perform hard work in the company. They just went to the meetings and expressed their opinion, but they didn't have any liability, and they didn't actually did any work as board member. Those days are now over, due to the duty of directors to exercise reasonable with care, diligence in their role. Okay, this is the first objective of corporate governance, promoting the exercise with reasonable care, skill, and diligence of the directors. Another important objective is to promote the success of the company, of course. Another corporate governance objective is that directors are meant to develop their own informed view on the company's activity. Directors should not be delegates who just adopt the commands, the orders gave by the general shareholders meeting, okay? And they do not, they shall not avoid the responsibility to make independent decisions, just relying their knowledge in some experts or other directors. They have to study all the decisions. They have to ask advices with other people if they do not have the concrete knowledge, and they have all the responsibility to the decisions they make. Okay, so a director needs to be informed, needs to have to express their opinion in the board member meeting, and of course it requires a lot of effort for director, especially if they are not familiarized with the key aspects of the company activity. But now all directors have to study all the decisions before making a decision. Okay. Another corporate governance objective is that they shall avoid any conflict of interest and personal benefits. Of course, directors shall always think not in their personal preferences, but in the best for the company. We're gonna watch a small video of the importance of corporate governance given by the Dean of IESE, which is a very prestigious business school of Spain.
Today's problems in corporations have to do not only with having a very good professional class in management, but also in having a good system of governance by which both the board of directors, shareholders, and the top management team can actually interact with one another in order to make the company sustainable in the long term. Well, we see many of them in reading newspapers. We see problems that have to do with chief executives that actually are fighting against the board of directors, with board of directors that are fighting against shareholders, with some shareholders that are fighting against other shareholders. All those things actually reflect, in some ways, obviously human condition, but also they also reflect that sometimes the long-term dimension of a company and the long-term objective of a company is not clear to the major stakeholders of a corporation. I think that a good system of corporate governance has to create a framework with some goals, some objectives, some shared values that most of stakeholders actually agree with, and a frame that actually can help the top management team and board of directors to develop strategic plans and action plans that could be those long-term objectives effective and feasible within the boundaries of what a corporation can actually do. Well, integrated vision actually means that both the objectives of shareholders, the board of directors, and the top management team actually could get aligned one way or another. And from this definition of aligned objectives, the company can actually develop some mechanisms for developing and designing strategic plans, designing a compensation system, designing control systems for the company, and designing mechanisms by which information goes back and forth between shareholders and the board of directors, or between boards of directors and the top management team. So integration means that in governing a company, the top management team does not take into account only their own preferences. They have to take into account the preferences, the objectives that they have agreed with the board of directors, and also the board of directors has to take into account what shareholders expect from them and from the top management team. Any system of corporate governance actually involves a number of very important ingredients. First of all, the quality of people in the board of directors, in the top management team, also the professionalism of those people. Sometimes we tend to mix up things in corporate governance simply because we don't take professionalism very seriously. We think that some problems can be just solved by setting up some incentive systems. Incentive systems are important, but you actually need to design a corporate governance model in which all the ingredients are not just efficient by themselves, but also they are coherent with one another. The third dimension of very good governance system is to have a project for the company, a project that is more than just a strategic plan. A project is actually something that helps explain why this company actually exists and why this company actually operates the way it does. And a project that could be shared, again, by shareholders, the board of directors, and the top management team. And finally, there is a very important ingredient that no matter how good the corporate governance system actually is, that any company actually needs this value, which is trust. Without trust, there is no possible to build up, to develop a system of corporate governance that could successfully project the company or help project the company into the long term, into the future. So we need people, we need a project, we need a very strong sense of professionalism, but also at the end of the day, we also need trust that actually builds and helps develop these relationships so that the company could develop itself for the long term.
And speaking about corporate governance, the board of directors have a lot of duties, additional duties to those legal duties that all board of directors have. For example, directors shall set in the company's objectives, directors shall determine the strategy to achieve those objectives, provide the leadership and put them into practice within the company, supervising the management of the business, and reporting to the shareholders, of course. We are going to name several best practices of corporate governance. Of course, there are hundreds of best practices of corporate governance, but we are going to just name the main ones. The first one, for example, is to form a strong and diverse team of the board of directors with a very well qualified curriculum. As we spoke, there was a time in which the general shareholders meeting used to name directors just for their names or their reputation. Those times are over, and nowadays you have to appoint directors by forming a strong board of directors, a diverse board of directors, and all our directors have to be very well qualified for each position. Another best practice is that responsibilities and roles should be well spelled out, so it has to be perfectly clear which one has to make every decision. The reporting structures have to be pretty clear, so that all parts of the chain of corporate governance know which are their concrete functions. Okay. Another best practice is that the board should practice and hold good ethics and integrity in high regard. Okay. Another good best practice is that you have to measure performance and establish principal remuneration decisions. As you know, remuneration within companies is maybe the most sensible issue, but in the board members, you have to put perfectly clear the objectives that they have to achieve in order to have a concrete remuneration. You have to tie their remuneration to its concrete measure within the board member. Another best practice is that board members should actively work towards effective risk management. So board members should have to prevent risk situation in companies, or they have to constantly inform to the general shareholders meeting. Maybe the board of directors decides to have a very high risk with an operation that's perfectly legal, but the general shareholders meeting shall to be perfectly informed as and consent such high risk. Another best practice is that in big companies, the role of the CEO of the company and the chairman shall to be split, okay? So you have to have the CEO with executive functions and the chairman of the company in two different board members. Another best practice is that board of directors should have at least 3 non-executive directors. There was a time in which every member of the board of directors had as well executive powers. Nowadays, corporate governance advise to have at least 3 non-executive directors within the board. And the last best practice is that each board of directors should have an audit committee composed by non-executive directors. So that the audit committee could have an accountability of the decision-making process of such board of directors. And we are going to finish this video by mentioning the 2 typical models of governance or of corporate governance, which are shareholder model and the stakeholder model of governance. Typically, in the shareholder model, the shareholders has the primacy in relation to the wealth generated by the companies. And in theory, that maximize the shareholders' value, and if it goes well for the majority shareholders, it's going well as well for the company. That's the theory of the shareholders model. However, in the stakeholder model, in the center of the company, in the center of the model, they are not the shareholders, but the stakeholders. Usually, lenders like banks or investors, external investors. For example, in Germany, less than 3/4 of all German listed companies have a majority owner. So that means that there is a lot of free float, minority shareholders, as we saw previously in this video, and the shareholders do not have a central role in the life of the company. As you can see here in the image, both models, shareholders model and stakeholder model, have benefits and disadvantages. Just for mentioning 2 or 3 of them, the benefits of the shareholder model could be that encourage entrepreneurship, encourage people to create new companies, encourage investment. And disadvantages, let's say that there is a risk of short-termism, and it could have a top management greed. Let's think that top management could be influenced by a big greed, thinking in a short-term model, and this can bring a lot of problems to the company. However, in the stakeholder model, for example, there is a lot of benefits for investors because they are more able to have an accountability of the board of directors. They have closer monitoring of management, and there is a long-term decision horizons. Okay, and as well, it has several disadvantages as potential interfere with management. Let's think, for example, in banks who have loaned a great amount of money to a certain company. Of course, those banks are going to try to interfere into management, and it could have a slower decision making than in the shareholder model because they are external parties. Thank you.